The America's Energy Coast represents NGOs, or environmental conservation organizations. It represents the communities of the Gulf Coast from Texas to Alabama. It represents industry, and it represents the governments, government, elected officials, local, state, in all 4 states.
We have this horrible spill offshore, and quite frankly, are there best practices that should be implemented here in this country and in the Gulf that are utilized in other parts of the world? Are there better opportunities in terms of technology that we could use? And how can we begin to gather that data together so that we are maximizing the knowledge base that is out there, and we're putting our mind to it? This group and those associated with it, rather on the educational staff or technology or through the oil and gas industries, are totally competent to kind of deal with that issue and look at it from a purely intellectual standpoint.
It's very timely that this group is meeting right now because there's so much finger pointing. We think that there needs to be really a strong and hard look at what has happened and look at what the response will be, both short-term and long-term. One of the outcomes of this meeting will be to design plans to build resilient communities across the Gulf. And certainly incidents like this, hurricane events, natural and man-made events are on the table.
Oil spills or oil problems are not new. The first documented oil spill in Texas was in 1543 when the survivors of the Fernando de Soto expedition ran aground between High Island and Sabine Pass and discovered pools of oil, crude oil, heavy crude oil. And this was in the diary by one of the members of that expedition named Orozco. And they essentially distilled that and mixed it and used that to patch their boats and get underway again. So we've had oil awash on Texas shores, and I'm sure other coastal state shores, for at least 5 centuries. It's nothing new. The University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology Professor McCormick recently informed us that oil seeps are a natural occurrence in the Gulf of Mexico. He says there's approximately 2,300 oil seeps, natural seeps in the Gulf of Mexico that discharge. And I use the term discharge. I'm sick of the press going spewing or spurting or all this. I mean, just call it discharge. I mean, that discharge up to 900,000 barrels of oil a year in the Gulf of Mexico. That's a lot of oil. That's a lot of seeps. And you think about it, we had seeps on land. I mean, the first surface production of oil, of crude, was a result of discovering seeps, where the oil would come up to the surface. If you remember the Beverly Hillbillies TV show, and Jed Clampett's out there with his muzzle loader or whatever, shotgun, boom, he shoots something and bubbling crude comes up. That was a seep. I think the first discovery in 1858 in Pennsylvania was a seep. I think the first discovery here in Texas up in Corsicana was a seep. Well, we found all the seeps because they were on the surface of the land. You could find them easily, but the ones in the Gulf of Mexico, they're still out there. So it's not to say that what's happening, the Deepwater Horizon spill, is not potentially and already catastrophic. It's just to say that we need to put all this in context when we start talking about exploration and production and the future of that. We're fearful that all of a sudden the nation will look at this and say, we shouldn't do that anymore. Well, I'm sorry, we should do it. Offshore production, offshore exploration, we're going to do it. And we can maybe take advantage of this opportunity to find out how we can do it better, safer, and with a little more protection of the environment, and how to recover and clean up when we have catastrophes like we're having today.
This is a group of interests that represent the Gulf of Mexico, and it's called the America's Energy Coast. The officials that are meeting here today are going to discuss the vulnerabilities, and certainly in light of the recent incident in the Gulf, it's a very timely meeting.
The ecosystem for the Nature Conservancy has long been a conservation priority. It's an incredible area of biodiversity. Just from a fishery standpoint, 90% of the organisms that we depend on in the fishery spend at least part of their life cycle in the marshes of Louisiana and distribute through the Gulf. We have endangered species, we have whales, we have animals that are making comebacks, such as the brown pelican. So it's an incredibly rich, valuable ecosystem for not only the beauty of the system and the natural resources it's provide, but for that linkage to us that we depend on so heavily.
And what do you see now as the potential threat?
Well, like everyone, we don't understand all of the impacts yet, but clearly the potential impacts on the oil in the ecosystem, there is a lot of discussion about dispersants. Well, this is new to us in terms of this volume and at this depth, so we are all remaining vigilant, and I know the federal and state agencies and other NGOs are watching to see if we need to alter our activities related to that. The impacts on the beaches. Also what we don't see is the impacts potentially on the whole food chain, which can impact, say, a pelican brings home an oiled animal to feed its young. What are the impacts on future populations? So we can see some short-term impacts showing up now, but we're gonna have to be very aggressive about our monitoring efforts in the future so we can address the impacts as we can as they show up.
This event go from being a terrible tragedy to what could be an economic calamity. It's no secret that a great deal of the economic activity in the Gulf Coast, particularly Louisiana, is dependent upon a vibrant offshore oil and gas exploration development sector. And one of the things that we're seeing is a tendency by federal officials that are trying to react to the spill to perhaps do so in a manner that is more of a knee-jerk reaction than a thoughtful reaction. An example of that is the recent announcement by Secretary Salazar of a drilling moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico. The net effect of that, while it sounds good as a sound bite, the net effect of that has actually been to potentially shut down immediately shallow water drilling, which is very different from deep water drilling. In shallow water drilling, you have surface stack BOPs. You're mostly drilling for natural gas. You're in an area that is working on prospects that are well developed and have been there for a long time. Doesn't have the same risk parameters as a deep water prospect does, but yet those are the very first ones that are going to get shut down, and we're right at the moment where we may see in the next 30 days up to 50 drilling rigs shut down in the Gulf of Mexico with a consequent economic impact of loss of maybe 10 or 15,000 jobs once you roll in all of the ancillary services that go with those drilling operations. So again, I think it's important that our federal officials measure twice, cut once, make sure that they're looking at the true outcome of policies when they announced them. I think that Secretary Salazar was trying to say that he was going to do something and did so by announcing this drilling moratorium, but the impact of it is, I don't think he fully understood.
Just because you don't live on the coast does not mean that things that happen here do not impact you. And so if you're putting gasoline in your car, if you're going to Walmart or Target and buying goods at those stores, that chances are those products were refined in Gulf states or they were offloaded in Gulf state ports.
We're coming together as a diverse group of interests to talk about solutions and to talk about approaches to sustainability of this entire Gulf region, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And I think that what we all have to keep in mind is that this is a working coastline. There are inherent risks as a result of that. This is one of them. Just like climate change, just like hurricanes, just like the loss of land and deteriorating infrastructure. So there are many inherent risks when it comes to working coastlines, and we all have to work together to find those solutions.